I cried out for my mother's help, but she remained intent on the water. Her concentration didn't waver until something half human and half animal crept near and pinched my arm. That brought her out of her reveries, and she exploded into a shower of angry red light that beat back the weights and left an odor of singed feathers in the house. My father noticed the strange smell the moment he returned, his alarm evident. He found us huddled in bed together. At the sight of him, my mother burst into apologetic tears. I never felt entirely safe in the dining room again. Any remaining sense of security evaporated after I turned 17, when my mother and father went to Africa and didn't come back alive. I shook myself and focused again on the dilemma that faced me. The manuscript sat on the library table pool of lamplight. Its magic pulled on something dark and knotted inside me. My fingers returned to the smooth leather. This time, the prickling sensation felt familiar. I vaguely remembered experiencing something like it once before, looking through some papers on the desk in my father's study. Turning resolutely away from the leather-bound volume, I occupied myself with something more rational, searching for the list of alchemical texts I generated before leaving New Haven. It was on my desk, hidden among the loose papers, book call slips, receipts, pencils, pens, and library maps, neatly arranged by collection and then by the number assigned to each text by a library clerk when it had entered into the Bodleian. Since arriving a few weeks ago, I have been working through the list methodically. The copied-out catalog description for Ashmole 782 read: Anthropologia, or a treatise containing a short description of man in two parts, the first anatomical, the second physiological. As with most of the works I studied, there was no telling what the contents were from the title. My fingers might be able to tell me about the book without even crackling open the covers. Aunt Sarah always used her fingers to figure out what was in the mail before she opened it, in case the envelope contained a bill she didn't want to pay. That way she could plead ignorance when it turned out she owed an electric company money. The gilt numbers on the spine winked. I sat down and considered the options. Ignore the magic, open the manuscript, and try to read it like a human scholar. Plus the bewitched volume aside and walked away. Push the bewitched volume aside and walk away. Sarah would chortle with delight if she knew my predicament. She had always maintained that my efforts to keep magic at arm's length were futile, but I've been doing so ever since my parents' funeral. There, the witches amongst the guests had scrutinized me for signs that the bishop and proctor blood was in my veins, all the while patting me encouragingly and predicting it was only a matter of time before I took my mother's place in the local coven. Some had whispered their doubts about the wisdom of my parents' decision to marry. Too much power, they muttered, when they thought I wasn't listening. They were bound to attract attention, even without studying ancient ceremonial religion. This was enough to make me blame my parents' death on supernatural power they wielded and to a search for a different way of life. Turning back on anything to do with magic, I buried myself in the stuff of human adolescence, horses and boys and romantic novels, and tried to disappear among the town's ordinary residents. At puberty, I had problems with depression and anxiety. It was all very normal, the kindly human doctor assured my aunt. Sarah didn't tell him about the voices, about my habit of picking up the phone a good minute before it rang, or that she had to enchant the doors and windows when there was a full moon to keep me from wandering into the woods in my sleep. Nor did she mention that when I was angry, the chairs in the house rearranged themselves into a precarious pyramid before crashing to the floor once my mood lifted. When I turned 13, my aunt decided it was time for me to channel some of my power into learning the basics of witchcraft, lighting candles with a few whispered words, or hiding pimples with a time-tested potion These were a teenage witch habitual first steps. But I was unable to master even the simplest spell, burned every potion my aunt taught me, and stubbornly refused to submit to her test to see if I had inherited my mother's uncanny accurate second sight. The voices, the fires, and other unexpected eruptions lessened as my hormones quieted, but my unwillingness to learn the family's business